Welcome to the Black Gems Dive In podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into conversations about inclusive cultures and everything DEI. Your co-hosts are Kua and Kendra, and we're thrilled to be your hosts as we explore the crucial topics shaping our workplaces and communities today. In each episode, we'll unpack insights, share stories, and engage with experts to foster a deeper understanding of how we can create more inclusive environments where everyone feels valued and empowered.
Hey, Kua.
Hey, Kendra.
We're back for another episode.
Another episode of the Black Gems Dive In podcast.
Yes. And first of all, before we start, let me just say this. Shout out to all y'all who have been listening to us because we've been getting a lot of great feedback in the community and outside of our Western New York area. So keep talking to us about ideas that you guys want to hear about and just conversation. Because it really does help when it comes to us sitting on these sofas every week to talk about what conversation we're going to have next. So thank you for all of our listeners out there.
Yeah, and it's been really cool because we've seen some connections being made after our episodes, which is, you know, it's dope, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know I've had a couple folks reach out and asking to be connected to other folks that have come on the podcast as guests. And so I'm liking the organic connections. You know, we always say we're connectors in general.
Right.
But just the organic conversations and connections that have been happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, y'all.
So this has been exciting.
Right?
I love the engagement.
Exactly.
So we're going to move into our, what we call now, diversity dispatch. We just need a little sound. Just, think about the sound. So this week we're going to talk about Duke University. So Duke University's moved to end full ride scholarship for Black students gets mixed reaction from former students. This is a CNN article that came out a few weeks ago. But it says Duke University's decision to end a full ride scholarship program for Black students has received both support and criticism from former recipients of the award. The university announced earlier this month, so earlier in April, that the Reginald M. Howard Memorial Scholarship will be replaced by the Reginald Howard Leadership Program, which will be, quote unquote, open to all Duke undergrads. In an announcement published on Duke's website, the university said it told current scholarship recipients that the transition was necessary, quote, due to the legal landscape related to race-based considerations in higher education, end quote. And so we're starting to see, again, where many of these scholarships are being pulled back based off of some of the legal decisions that we've seen in the Supreme Court, most recently affirmative action. And so we saw last year that the Supreme Court struck down race-based college admissions. And so we're seeing now the fallout from some of those actions. It goes on to say that we are reimagining the the Reggie Howard Scholars Program to expand the impact of Howard's legacy to make more Duke students with a commitment to leadership and social justice. Duke University spokesman Frank Tramble said in a statement, the scholarship will elevate the experience of our Black students by enriching their academic connections with faculty, providing funding for internships and research, strengthening community ties, and developing scholarly programs that highlights Black excellence through the Mary Lou Williams Center for Black Culture. And so you're seeing where, again, now they're taking it out of the race base and saying that this leadership program will be applying to everyone.
Yeah. And there's a lot of mixed feelings, obviously, on this specific update. And there was a student that actually got the scholarship that they interviewed, and they had asked, you know, what are your feelings around this being removed and taken back? He obviously was disappointed in it, and he said that it's critical to attracting talent to the university. He added that scholars have gone on to become CEOs, authors, and have even earned PhDs. And so he said, quote, it felt a little bit like the university was reducing the scholarship down to the race of the people that were in it, where they kind of made the interpretation that this was only a scholarship for Black students and was nothing else unique or interesting about the folks that made up this pool, and therefore they chose to eliminate it. That was very saddening to me, right? And so there was another student, Wilton Alston, who also talked about graduating Duke in 1981, and he felt anger, sadness, and loss about ending the scholarship, but ultimately decided to support the new leadership program and give it a chance, right? So more folks could engage in that program, even though it was targeted specific to exemplary students of African descent. It paid full tuition. room and board for recipients, and now that's been archived on the website. So they're not even talking about it anymore from that particular stance, right? I think it was named after a student that went to Duke University, and I don't know do you know the connection to that student?
Yeah, so the scholarship was established in 1979 and was named after Duke's first black student body president.
That's right.
Who was killed in an automotive accident during his sophomore year. Okay,
so named in reverence, really, to someone who graduated, was the first black class president of the university, and now it's kind of reeling all this back. And it's not necessarily in the direct line of who it was named after.
Exactly. And they're moving it to more of a leadership program. And so for broader context, too, so it says Duke isn't the only North Carolina college making changes, as we know. Earlier this week, so back in early April, the University of North Carolina's Board of Governors voted to repeal and replace the school's existing diversity inclusion policy, and the board oversees 16 public universities and 1 high school in the state. The new policy, which goes to the full board for a final vote in May, will emphasize the university's commitment to quote-unquote non-discrimination and institutional neutrality, which is, again, interesting words as we talk about moving into our topic today. But, again, we are seeing a lot of these programs being repealed and reformatted to make sure that it fits everyone. And so they're removing these scholarships, removing some of this policy, removing the language for folks who it benefited in the past.
Yeah. So, I guess this is a good time to dive into our topic for today that we're going to discuss. But I think even still, this feels like a step back, right? It does feel like a step backwards for these universities to say, you know what, we're no longer going to make decisions based off of race or gender or just other diversity characteristics, but this is the time that we're in.
It is. And it is frustrating, right? Because we're not talking about legacy programs.
We're still not talking about legacy programs,
which are full in effect, right? Yeah. And so we know obviously who that benefits and things like that. So again, as we go into our topic, we could talk about like how can we benefit and work together for the total good of everyone.
And I think that's a great point. Like even bringing, and we often talk about, legacy and no one's even really talking about that. But I think that's a good point that, there's not I don't know if there's a structured program, for instance, around something like legacy admissions. Like, is this just an unwritten rule for how things work? Are there formal programs? And maybe that's something we need to do a little bit more research on.
There are formal programs that are out there. Yes. And I've been a part of some institutions where they do have formal programs based off of legacy. Right. And so based off of if your grandparents or your parents went there, and even so, if it's not a direct tie into automatic admissions into that institution, it could be, because your parents went here, you get a certain percentage off of your tuition.
Interesting.
Like all those different, which we know inherently are scholarships.
Sure.
Right. Sure. So there are programs that are out there that are based off of legacy that no one is talking about.
Okay. So I take that back.
Yes. I've been a part of those conversations.
Okay, I take that back, right? Because I've been in public schools my entire life, whereas, I know my counterpart.
I've been in private schools my entire life.
Private schools her entire life. And so I think that's even interesting from that standpoint of knowledge and awareness around these things, right? So we have a few different scholarships and programs that are targeting communities of color. This one in particular, Black students that are coming into Duke University, but we don't hear oftentimes that side. Now remember the whole scandal around the admissions. I think it was a school in Cali, all these actors and actresses that sent their kids.
Yes.
Remember that?
This was years ago. They sent them to a specific person that was supposed to help them with SATs or something like that.
Yes. So there was rumblings of that type of thing. And I think somebody even served time. I don't know. It's like kind of fake time or something.
Yes.
I don't know if it's real.
No, I think they did. I think they served a little bit of time. But they wanted to get their kids into the Berkeleys or the USCs or whatever of the world.
Yeah.
And so they paid a person to kind of like do fake scores for SATs, I believe it was.
Okay.
And so we know this, it's real when it comes to a lot of these older institutions in our country and people want admissions to. And so again, like it goes back to who is allowed in certain spaces, right? But we know, again, based off of this article, those who were granted this scholarship have become CEOs and have been great citizens within our country. And so now just, again, bringing that back from 1979 to now, it's like, you know, a lot of people feel like this is just a blow.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
So I guess let's dive into our discussion for today. And we've been having a lot of conversations around how do we reframe or maybe even rebrand diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And that's because it is under attack. You see left and right. We keep talking about this diversity dispatch and talking about things that are happening across the country. I think more recently, we've been discussing like education and how affirmative action has been rolled back.
Right.
But now we're in this position where even saying the words DEI, like I can tell you, because, you know, we still are both practitioners in this space and we're still doing a lot of education and conversations. And it's different. I don't know.
Different.
And maybe let's just talk about that a little bit in terms of how the feeling is. How is it? How do you feel this conversation's being received by folks at this point?
So I would say right now it's polar opposites, right? You have people who are still embracing it, who are saying, you know, we are fully buying into DEI and what it should be, and we do believe that this is something that we need to embed into our organization. I will say that more and more you're starting to hear some of the words justice also being put in there. So you're hearing JEDI principles, so justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then you have people on the other end are saying we shouldn't be doing this at all. And then the people who are meeting in the middle saying, should we rebrand this so that people can accept what we're doing, right? And so you're hearing that a lot more. I will say also, too, that in this space, there are people who are more vocal about feeling like they're left behind. So you're hearing that. But I do think that more and more the conversation is, should we rebrand the name, although we're still doing the work?
Right. And I think there's a lot of sentiments around that. So I lead this diversity and inclusion executive exchange, and there's a lot of folks from all different paths, right? There's corporations in there, there's nonprofits, healthcare organizations. And the conversations are varied depending on what segment of, you know, companies are talking. And so I would say that the mixed feelings around even rebrand, some folks feel strongly about that, like absolutely not. We should not rebrand. We're going to double down. You know, we have a committed resource or, you know, program that's relevant. And so, no, we're going to double down and stay the course. There's other folks who are saying, I'm getting questions, right? I want to, you know, these folks want to know what the bottom line is. How is this program actively helping in another area of the organization, right? Like, how is this really directly impacting business? And so now the conversations are kind of shifting a bit. And so they're having different conversations around how they approach this. And so as someone who's leading this group, you know, obviously it's a different approach depending on the organization, but at the same time, still staying the course on the work that needs to be done. So the work still needs to be done. We might just need to call it something different to get it done in your organization, right?
Exactly. And also, too, but this isn't new, right? Because along the way, you've heard the words tolerance, you've heard the words belonging, right? And so there are many people who even question, like, what does that mean, right? And even I've had conversations with people who say, okay, we are using those words, not tolerance, but belonging. Is that softening what we're doing? Right? Are we just placating the folks in this space right now? And so, again, you have people who are strong about it. And then now you're even hearing more of like inclusion officer, like those type of terms too, and just taking DE, diversity inclusion, or diversity and equity out of it and just doing chief inclusion officer. So
Interesting.
Yeah, or I've heard chief belonging and inclusion officer as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think this, so let's dive in. Let's dive into this conversation, because along those lines of how we rebrand, I think that it's also reframing this work as well. And so there's a lot of conversations, I think even locally, around this concept of targeted universalism, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about targeted universalism today, but then also give you some context around how that's being used and how you might use this in the spaces that you're actively, you know, pursuing as a DEI practitioner, as someone who's in an organization that wants to see this move forward. And it just, let's talk about what this potentially looks like, right? So this is actually coming from Berkeley, right? And John A. Powell is the director who's having this conversation. And so we actually listened to a podcast to kind of prepare us for this conversation, but then also we did our own research around what it means. And so targeted universalism means setting universal goals pursued by targeted processes to achieve these goals. And so it says within a targeted universal framework, universal goals are established for all groups concerned. These strategies are developed to achieve these goals. And they're targeted based on how different groups are situated within structures, culture, and across geographies to obtain this universal goal. And so it says that targeted universalism is goal-oriented, and the process is directed in service of the explicit universal goal. And so that's a lot that we talked about, right, just as it relates to this. But essentially it's saying that everyone is situated differently.
Yes.
This is also coming from the concept of what equity is. And so when we think about equity, it's giving everyone a resource for their specific need,
right,
versus, a lot of folks think that DEI is equality,
right,
which means that everyone is getting the same resource no matter what.
Right.
So in equality, let's just kind of paint the picture because, as practitioners, we do this. So give you a little bit of shared language.
Yes.
In an equality standpoint, y'all have probably seen those fences, the fence with the boxes, and people are situated on these boxes. And, the shortest one has 3 boxes to see over the fence. The tallest one does not have a box. The person in the middle might have 1 box so that they can actively see over the fence. We've often talked about like a bike.
Yep.
So that's another way that we've referenced equity. So if you give everyone the same size bike, it's not going to fit everybody, because if I'm tall, I need a larger bike with larger wheels to, be framed to my body. If I am differently abled and I can't use my legs, I might need, I want to call it a unicycle. I know it's called something else, but one of those bikes that has the 3 wheels that fits my needs so that I can use my arms actively to use that bike. And so when you think about equity from that standpoint, it's giving everyone the resource that they need to be successful. And now targeted universalism is coming and saying, we know that everyone is situated differently. We have to actively choose a goal that everyone needs to get to.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and I know even, some of the discussion that around target universalism is people are saying now it's equity 2.0, right? It's taking it to the next step. And based off of the conference or what you just talked about with the boxes and seeing over the fence, I look at it as if we can take away the fence, right? And so you take that away, you eradicate some of those barriers, and now that's what we're talking about in targeted universalism, where everyone is benefiting. So now you don't have to necessarily keep propping up all these different folks, right? And so that's the way I envision it. And with target universalism, like I said, it's like a 2.0 of equity. It really talks about, again, everyone is going towards this shared goal, so it's not an either or approach, right? And so you're seeing this now even in policy and policy making and everything that's going on now in 2024, where you have these polar opposites, and it's because everyone feels like, or people feel like, this person is getting more than I'm getting, I'm getting less than, and so you're just tug and pull constantly. But if everyone is working towards this shared goal that you can see that everyone is benefiting from, then I feel like we can come and have more meaningful conversations. And so you're not on those polar opposites that we're seeing in conversations that we have with organizations today.
Yeah.
So even in the podcast that we listened to, one of the examples they gave was universal healthcare, and which now exists within Canada. And one thing he was saying was, Dr. Powell was saying, is that everyone doesn't need universal health care, right? Because if you live in a rural area, right, you may need access to the hospital as opposed to someone who lives right next to the hospital, right? And so everyone getting now universal health care is not going to benefit everyone. Yeah. So now you have this tug and pull where people are like, well, my tax dollars aren't going to pay for this because
Right, exactly.
And so how can we now have more of a targeted approach where everyone is benefiting, right? And so I found that to be interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know in the podcast too, he talked about even health insurance, right? Yeah. So if you gave everyone health insurance, and that's the universal goal.
Yes.
So to say everybody's going to get health insurance. So yeah, you get it, I get it. And then he talked about, okay, but I live in a rural country that's maybe 100 miles from the doctor's office, and that's not what you particularly need, right? So you might have access to the health insurance, but you still don't have access to a doctor. So what other things can we do to kind of give rise to that? So maybe it's telehealth as a resource to get access to a doctor. Maybe it's a mobile unit that's going out to different places to meet people where they're at. But ultimately, to your point, there's a lot of conversations, especially in the DEI world, around, if you're talking about this group, that must mean that I'm isolated and I'm not involved. And so when I talk about some of the conversations that we have, even in doing trainings, you start to see different faces and what they look like. I recently did a training where there was a woman of color who was like, hey, white men, I don't hear y'all saying much. Right? Like, you can also be a part of this conversation, but then we've done different trainings where you've separated groups based on race to have specific conversations. And in some of those conversations where, it is white folks, they're saying, we don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't feel comfortable in this space because I don't know where I'm situated in it, right? Like, should I speak up? Should I not? And so in these different cases, you're starting to see those imbalances, right? In terms of that conversation. So when it comes to something like targeted universalism, it's saying it's going to help talk about an ultimate goal of where everyone should be. And it's not particularly singling out any specific group, which is different than it used to be, right?
And it's very interesting. Your example made me think of, so a few years ago at 514, when we unfortunately had the mass shooting over here at TOPS, it made me think about a conversation I had with a group of students. And I'm going to paint the picture for you guys. So we had one black student who lived in an affluent area within the city of Buffalo and has access to grocery stores and, walkable neighborhoods, all those different things. And then there was a white student who lives right around the corner from TOPS on the east side of Buffalo. And they were going at it, bumping heads to say, you don't understand where I'm coming from. We had the white student who said, I feel like I'm being left behind because I don't have access to, a grocery store outside of TOPS. So now I have to take a bus, and my family and I have to take a bus, because at that time they were busing people to different grocery stores. I have to take a bus to different grocery stores because I don't have access to a grocery store right now, and I don't feel safe in my neighborhood, and I feel like, I'm forgotten in my neighborhood, where this affluent black family, this black student, who again can walk to neighborhoods or get in a car, whatever the case may be, she's like, I feel like I'm being left out of the conversation because I'm a black student or a black person, and that's who they're targeting in this grocery store. All those different things. And so again, underlying when we're talking about, what are we talking about here? We're talking about access to healthy foods, access to grocery stores, all those different things. But you're seeing where two different groups of people are bumping heads because they feel like they're not benefiting from those conversations
or being centered.
Exactly. Right. And so that just made me think about that conversation too as well, because again, this is why people become polar opposites, right?
So the article, it goes on to talk a little bit about universal policies, right? So such as minimum wage or universal basic income, they treat everyone the same regardless of need or circumstance. And blanketed universal policies can actually deepen inequalities by failing to account for the reality that different groups are situated differently in society. And so it goes on to talk about targeted policies such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and it singles out and gives certain benefits or protections to particular subgroups. Benefits or protections are given through targeted policies depending on membership in a specified group or eligibility category, such as income level. And it says, because targeted policies leave out members of other groups, this approach invites resentment, claims of unfairness, making this approach politically unstable and able to create lasting change, right? And I think that's a big piece of this too. And we keep saying this, words are being co-opted. This movement is being shifted because people are saying, just earn it, right? Like, oh, well, why do you have to have a special program that's specified for you as a person of color, as a woman, as a person of the LGBTQ community? And so this approach, when you're saying, we just want a universal goal, shouldn't everyone have access to being able to see a doctor?
You should, yes.
You should, right? But guess what? Everyone's not going to have the same means of getting to the doctor, so we have to be very specific in terms of how we do that.
And it goes on to say, again, like, this is really deepening the understanding of equity by calling attention to how people are situated differently. And as practitioners, we talk about all the time positionality and how that plays into structures and cultures and norms and all those different things as well. But in order to develop target universalism, there has to be, as Professor Powell says, there has to be certain strategies, and it has to be strategic, right? So by developing strategies for everyone rather than preference groups alone, suffering experience across the population can be acknowledged and political resilience can be built. Right. Yeah. And so he goes on to talk about there's 5 steps of targeted universalism. Number 1, set a universal goal. Right? Sounds easy.
Very true, right? So
sounds easy, but that really takes strategy and it takes time, right? Because we all know, okay, you can put out a universal goal of healthcare, right? Or healthy foods, right? Access to healthy foods. So that's the universal goal, right? But again, the second part of it is really assessing the generational population, the general population performance relative to the universal goal. So that's really disaggregating all these different groups, right? And what that looks like. Again, that takes time.
So I will give you an example there too from, assessing the population. So at my last organization, we created this dashboard, right? And so it was a scorecard, it was a dashboard where we could start to look at projected growth. Is it related to development in an organization? Is it related to promotions? We also looked at things like, termination. So whether they were voluntary or involuntary, and we disaggregated that information. I will tell you, we started putting this together in 2020. Obviously, there was a global pandemic we were living through amongst all the racial unrest at the same time. But we started to see trends in that data. And there was a specific, department in the organization where you started to see women leaving at higher rates than anybody else. But we knew that because I disaggregated that data to see that. Guess what? We had to go and start to ask questions and figure out why that might be the case. And we realized in this specific group, they're doing a lot of home visits and they're, external doing this, where they're also caretakers at home and maybe feeling a little bit of discomfort around a pandemic and going out and talking to people and kind of navigating that. And so, childcare was a big issue for a lot of folks as well. And statistically, that falls on women that do a lot more of that work. So you started to kind of see some different trends in the data. And this is exactly what this is talking about. Y'all got to know.
You got it. Data will tell you the story.
Exactly.
Data will tell you. You cannot ignore the numbers.
Right. And so even in this, and it assesses where everybody's at. If I'm living in rural country and you're living in the city, our stories are going to look a little bit different. So we have to know what those numbers look like to have a baseline of information.
Right, exactly. So the third step, is assessing and identifying the performance of groups that are performing differently with respect to the universal goal. Again, data, really disaggregating that data, looking at what that looks like. One of the examples that they gave in the podcast too was in regards to Social Security, which I thought was really
that was a good one. Yep.
Right, and so we know that you have to work a certain number of years to really pay into Social Security, and then once you turn a certain age, you can take that out.
Right.
But we know there's certain groups that may not necessarily have access to the Social Security because they take on these jobs that don't necessarily have, or they're able to collect a normal paycheck.
Right.
And so that can be, in the example that they gave were, housemaids or cleaning homes and things like that. Right. And so again, really assessing and identifying the performance of these groups are really important because again, that's going to tell the story to see, do I have to go back to number 1? Do I have to go back to what is that universal goal? Right. And really assessing that and what does that clearly look like? And also too, that's going to start that's where you're going to start taking that bias out of that too, because bias can show up in a lot of these steps as well.
Yeah. And I think he even talked about, say there's 2 people in the room and one is a millionaire and the other one is not. Maybe they're, a thousandaire. You're making $1,000. I don't know. But essentially, if you look at the aggregate, you can say, the average salary in that room is $1 million. But guess what? It's completely different depending on who you're talking to.
Exactly.
Right? And so I think this goal where it talks about assessing and identifying that performance of groups, you need to know what the performance of that group looks like in order to correct it and give it a specific goal that they can kind of get to. So the way that I see it is even if you have 2 two positions, one position might be higher, but how do we talk about a targeted goal for everybody? So maybe y'all are positioned, differently, but the goal is higher than both of y'all. Yeah. What means it's going to get us to that specific goal, right? So I think that's another way to kind of look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fourth step is assess and understand the structures and other factors that support or interfere each group from achieving the universal goal, right? So again, it's really assessing, like I said, structures and cultures are really important when you're looking at target universalism, and really seeing like where that imbalance may fit and lie, and why does that happen, and assessing again based off of the groups that you are looking at.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So that's really important to do as well.
Yeah, and I think, we have to also think about structures and what that looks like, because one of the examples that he had given in the podcast, even from a structural standpoint and policy standpoint, was there's certain policies that are just put forward, but guess what? It might be coming from someone who is differently positioned and situated. Yeah. So this person who's differently positioned and situated might not have an issue with following this policy to the T, because they created it with them in mind.
It's the bias.
It's the bias, right? So it's a blind spot from that standpoint. So he talked about, I think, a company that he was working at, and they had a policy around, okay, when you travel out of town, you have to get the compact car, right? Yeah. So me and Kendra are both 6 foot,
over
right?
6 feet tall.
6 foot tall, right? At that point. And so think about a compact car and you driving. Right. I mean, think about airplanes and being positioned in the back.
Up. Yes.
Right? Where your legs might be smashed. But in this case, he went to advocate for himself and said, listen, y'all, I'm tall. This compact car is barely fitting me. I'm uncomfortable. Can we do something different, right? Can I get maybe a regular car? I don't know, like the mid-size car or
I'm
whatever.
laughing because can I do that to the airline? Hey, Delta, I'm over 6 feet tall. Can I get this for free?
We should. Shoot.
we should. Because I literally in regular seats, like, this is not made for a tall person.
It's not. So in this case, right, he gives example. I went to the administrator and said, hey, can I get this type of car? Because this car does not fit me. It's uncomfortable. And maybe there's safety issues even from that standpoint where you're squishing a car. And so what they did was they made a workaround specifically for him. Yeah. But he was like, instead of looking at the entire policy, now everybody sees me as working around the system, or like, oh, he thinks he's special over there. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Whereas the person who probably wrote that policy is 5 foot and don't have to worry about, that type of means, right? I know also economics are probably a part of it too, but
right. No, I thought that was really interesting too, because I'm gonna call Delta, like Delta, American. Southwest, help me out.
Right.
And then the last step is develop and implement targeted strategies for each group to reach the goal, right? And so, again, this is something that obviously will be the next step to really developing target universalism, but then also to, again, setting forth that goal. And the way I look at it, too, is almost like, these are the 5 steps, but you also may have to go back to another step and reassess, right? It's not an end-all, be-all, right? There's going to be people, this is not ideal, right, for everyone. You're still going to have the resistance, but you're also going to start to build some trust and culture around what is happening. And it's going to take time, right? But this is something that I think that when we're looking at equity, we can start to move towards this conversation and what that looks like for these organizations. Yeah. And we talk about too, right? When you start to help one marginalized group, everyone starts to win, right? We talk about the curb effect. We talk about all these different things, right? And so this is really just building on some of the conversation that we already had.
And it also is saying we're, and this is why I think we can talk about maybe some of the some of the things that might not be as strong in this positioning and rebrand, but ultimately the curb cut effect talks about solving for the most disenfranchised. Yeah. And so when you're going out and you're talking to say, oh, you know what, we need to put this curb cut in the sidewalk, we're thinking specifically for folks that have physical disabilities. Right. And so they probably went out. They did. It was a part of the American Disability Act. We got to do this. This is going to make it easier for this group of people to use it. But what targeted universalism is saying is, no, you don't have to call out these specific groups, because the other piece of this that it touches on is these folks don't have the most political power. Yeah. And so you're going out externally and saying, hey, everybody, we want to help this specific subgroup. Think about it in the lens of today.
Right.
Trans rights. We want to help trans folks be able to access care that is most relevant for them. Guess what? Everybody's up in arms. Oh my gosh, why are you talking about that group?
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, why are you talking about the Black folks or, you know, the Latinx folks? Like, this is an issue because you're not talking about me. Whereas targeted universalism says we want everybody to reach this specific health.
Exactly.
Everybody has to reach that.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some groups that you don't have to go that far to get to that specific health, but other groups that have to go a lot further. And so it's not calling out a specific group, but it's the goal around we want everybody to be healthy. And what does that look like?
Exactly.
You know?
And I think about it, if I bring it home a little bit more, I think about here in our Buffalo community. So we talk about this a lot, but Say Yes and what Dave Russ is doing in the workforce development, Stephanie Pete, in the workforce development area. And, you know, when you look at their model, they have, you know, many of their participants are Black and brown children, and they're trying to put these children into a job with a viable working wage for their families, right? But one thing that Dave talks about all the time in that structure is that we're not just talking about we need to help Black and brown children and get a wage, right? We're talking about the greater Western New York community because we know there's going to be a gap in workforce development. There's going to be a gap, and we have students who can fill this gap as long as that we put them in a position to win.
Right.
So ultimately, the universal part of it is making sure that our city thrives and continues to thrive and grow and not get left behind.
Right.
And so we have these group of students who can help fill that gap while we're here, right? And so I think about that a lot too when we're having those conversations, because people may just say, oh, you're benefiting those children. No, we're benefiting the community as a whole. Right? So this is kind of like that approach without calling it out. Right?
And I think, you know, that's exactly it, right? So you do it in a way that everybody is supposed to reach this. If you've reached it, great. We're going to, you know, clap for you.
Right.
You're already there. Right. Help everybody else kind of get to where you're at.
And if they don't get to where they are, you're ultimately going to lose.
Exactly.
Right? Because you're not going to have a viable place to live.
Right.
Because you won't have businesses.
Right.
You won't have grocery stores. You won't have you won't have people to actually fill in these voids.
Or be able to afford your offerings, right? Yes. So, you can have all these nice things. I mean, there's a lot of conversations, I think, the Buffalo Bills, you know, we're in the city of Buffalo, and there's conversations around these seat prices and what they look like, right? So they talk about these PSLs where you have to pay a fee just to be able to reserve access to purchase the seat. Yes. And that started at what, like 40, 50,000
for business, and the thing
at
is
the club level.
At the club level, right? And so obviously they're reassessing this with the new stadium, right? And people are up in arms on it. So there's a lot to
and they're talking about you can't afford it, right? So I think it's the same notion. You have can I afford the cup of coffee at your coffee shop?
Right.
Can I afford the sandwich at your sandwich shop if folks do not have means to, you know, frequent your businesses? And so the goal around this is, hey, if everybody is making a thriving wage, then we all benefit because the economy is going to benefit from that. And so these are the types of conversations that, you know, we're trying to move towards in this space around targeted universalism.
Right, and it's not an either or approach.
Right, it's not.
Yeah.
So now some of the potential pitfalls, I'll just kind of call out one that I think about, and it was the same notion around folks who don't like the term BIPOC, right? And so that's one of those terms, BIPOC, it stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. But people are saying, no, be specific about who you're talking about and who you're targeting. And something like targeted universalism, if you're not saying a specific group and you're just saying everybody, that might kind of lose people there. But I think where it does, you know, strengthen that conversation and argument is if we're saying that everybody needs to get to this specific goal, then we're going to just encompass the entire group to get there. And every group is going to be, you know,
that
counted.
will come out in the strategy part of it too, right? So a lot of it, it's not just a blanketed statement, right? That's why we sit here, we work with organizations to develop strategy around it. We talk about workforce development. We talk about, even as we sit here in Beverly Gray, that's exactly what Beverly Gray is helping to do, is small business owners to help level up to the place that they need to be in. Right. And so a lot of these conversations, like, the goal is here, but this is who it's helping. Right. And ultimately it's helping everybody. Yeah.
So, you know, this is a term, you know, think about it. We'll put some resources out there to talk about it, maybe some links to link to this specific work. But as practitioners, looking at these faces and these crowds, if we can start to kind of shift some of that narrative and conversation around, hey, we just want people to be at a certain place.
Yes.
Let's see how that works. I think I'm going to start incorporating this concept
we were talking about that.
in some of the trainings that we do. So,
Professor Powell, if you listening.
Right. We're going to call you to Buffalo.
You. Yes. Ooh. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
We got the same.
We always are looking. We're always looking at each other.
We are.
Right.
So, all right. So we're going to leave people with the gem of the day.
Yeah. Let's do it.
I'm going to start with you this time.
Okay. I knew she was going to start with me. And I don't know if I said this in one of the last episodes or not, but challenging yourself to do things differently, but then also challenging yourself to do things that you're not doing well, right?
Yes.
So something like golf is something that we've both picked up more recently. Shout out to Brandy. I know Brandy also is golfing. And so we're challenging ourselves to get some folks together and do a golf session, right?
Yeah. Oh, I have not thought about this gym of the day.
Me neither, because I definitely just talked about this the last time, I think.
I've been ripping and running and ripping. I have not, but this is something that's not related, but I kind of said this, I don't know if this podcast, another one, I'm always talking, y'all. But one thing I think about a lot is my own personal professional development. And something I said before is 3 things that I'm going to continue to hone in on, and I've been assessing, and I hope that you guys do too. Is number 1, always make sure you have your finances together and make sure you have a backup plan, make sure you have your savings. Number 2, make sure you keep up your network and always expand your network as well. Which I'm starting to do a lot more, and being intentional about it, but also too making sure that it's, I'm being authentic, and it's not just putting people in my circle, but being really strategic about it. And the third thing, as kind of what you were talking about, Kua, is making sure that, you are honing in your skill set and also evolving at the same time. And so those are 3 things that I'm kind of looking at with myself and where I am in life now. And you have to continue to build that because you just never know when you have to tap into those 3 different resources.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
And it was succinct too.
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Finances, network, skills.
Right.
In no particular order.
Yeah.
But you make sure you keep those 3 up.
I think I'm going to add a little bit because I talked about, doing something that might be difficult. But, this past weekend, we both were honored with the Changemakers Award. Change Make Hers Award, right? So there were 21 women that were recognized for the work that we're doing in our different spaces. And one of the conversations that kind of wove through the entire brunch and theme was around self-care, right? Yeah. So we're all wearing many different hats as women. We're all working towards, bettering our communities, but centering self-care is something that we struggle with sometimes, right? And so you just heard different people talk about the ways that they approach self-care. I know you were one of those folks that talked about that as well. But one of the things around just waking up earlier, that's something that I think I'm going to challenge myself to do. I used to wake up super early to work out first thing, more so, now that I got the treadmill in my apartment, I'm not waking up that early to get to the gym because I have, my stuff in the house. But those are things that I think just resonated with me, right? Like different mechanisms and ways that you can better amplify your day.
Yeah, it's definitely something I think about. I mean, I'm an early riser. I think I've always been, but more so now, make sure I keep that routine. So I'm up by 5:30, no later than 6 o'clock most mornings. Even if I'm not working out, that's just my me time, me and Mello, my dog. So we're up normally just walking around the house, or I'm going to the gym. But one thing that also someone talked about self-care is habit stacking.
Oh, I did like that one.
And
I like that one.
I've been trying to habit stack because I'm reading Atomic Habits again.
Yep.
And so habit stacking is really important. So as I'm going to the gym, I'm also praying because praying daily is something that I write down literally, like that's something that I have to do. So as I'm going to the gym, I'm also praying, and I'm going to the gym while I'm also drinking, make sure I'm drinking my water.
Okay.
So habit stacking is really important. And so that's what I'm challenging myself to do now. So it's not like 3 succinct tasks.
Yeah.
It's, okay, if I'm doing this, I automatically am going to do this and do this, right? And so habit stacking is also really important.
That's dope. I like that. I like that. I've been doing daily devotionals every morning now, which honestly, I really like. Getting back to that space. Like before I even start the day, I open up the Bible app and I'm reading through, just whatever scripture it is for the day. But it's definitely kind of helps set the tone of my day and morning. So I'm appreciating that too. So, All right, y'all.
Another episode
in the books. Keep an ear out for, some of the activities that we're going to be doing here too. Yeah, we're going to put some information out there. Hopefully y'all can join us and we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye, Kua.
Bye. Peace.